and welcome to another episode of The Future Of. Our topic today is the future of public relations. Good morning, Vasi.
Hey, good morning, Azam. How are you?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good. I mean, the weather's changing here in Canada. I don't know about you, but I'm seeing snow outside of my
Yep,
window, so
coming
that's
outside.
interesting. But other than that, pretty good. Lots of things have changed in the last few months. And so for us, I think really the focus of this podcast is going to be putting together some really interesting episodes in terms of future state of a lot of topical and interesting things for us to explore.
Awesome. So, who do we have today?
Well, today we have someone who is quite a powerhouse in her industry. Her name is Marian Salzman, and she is really known as one of the world's sort of like top trendsetters among public relations executives. And that's really the focus of the podcast today, is the future of public relations. And throughout her career, she's always been one that's been very forward thinking. She's known as this amazing trend spotter to the point where she coined the phrase metrosexual. So we can thank
Oh,
her for that. And her background is quite impressive. She was the CEO of Havas PR North America for over a decade and has authored many, many books. I think something around 17 of them, and all really in the space of communications, marketing, public relations, et cetera, et cetera. And so, about a couple of years ago, she then took a job with Philip Morris International to head up their whole global communications department. And that's essentially where I know her. She is my senior global vice president. That's where I work as well. And again, like I said, quite a powerhouse. She's come in and completely transformed that space and continues to, like she has in most of her career, really push the envelope in the context of public relations, communications, and being a visionary. And one of the interesting things about her as well is that she issues an annual trends report. And so part of the podcast, we also touch upon, what some of those trends are, and also since the start of the pandemic, what has really shifted in the context of public relations and communications.
okay. So, why do you think it's an important topic these days?
Well, for me, I think that the way in which we communicate is absolutely paramount, especially now. We've been thrown into what I would say a situation where it's crisis, and it's a crisis that we have to manage day to day. And it's really important the way either people, companies, corporations, executives come off, and really how we manage and are able to either tell that story, either how we do it reactively, and how we sort of try to anticipate, what some of these challenges are. I also think when you look at the space of communications, it's critical in terms of leadership, in terms of leadership in the space of even say, let's say, politics. The
Hmm.
way that executives communicate, or people just in general. And so I think it's extremely topical, and I think it used to be a field or area that people used to kind of ignore and not think it's as important. But the more and more, the way that we see that communications, especially with social media, how it's evolved, it's become a very important, what I would say, key trait and key component of any organization if they want to do well moving forward.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I hope our listeners and our viewers, because now we're on YouTube as well, uh,
Yes, yeah,
enjoy this episode. Please give it a listen.
absolutely.
So thank you, Marian, for your time. So I want to start off with for our listeners and our few viewers, can you define what public relations is and how the definition may have evolved over the years?
So I'm not, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm not actually sure there is an agreed upon definition of what is public relations any longer, because I think as the world of earned, owned, and paid media has blurred, as the world of influence has kind of fused with social media, I think everybody has their own definition. For me, I'd say it's really about intelligent influence. It's really about how do you use the best thinking tools possible to persuade someone, whether it's to buy your product at the best possible price, it's to agree with you on an issue, it's to orient them around a new service, it's to build an executive brand. I think it's all those things, and yet for some people it's just crisis management. For others it's pure media relations, but I see it as much more of a smorgasbord, and it's a help yourself to whatever tools are gonna ensure that you achieve your objective.
And so based on that, what would you say would be what traditional, PR relations would have been years ago, and what public relations looks like today?
Once upon a time, I think it was great media relations. It was getting your client or your company into the right newspaper or on the right broadcast channel with the right message, and feeling like that story was going to resonate with your publics. I think that's all in the past. The right tweet today could set off exactly what you were trying to do by working with the New York Times or the Times of London or the Handelsblatt in Germany. So I think today it's about, through whatever legitimate means possible, to enter into not a dialogue even, but a trialogue, meaning I throw it out there, somebody else picks it up, a third party comments, and it begins like a snowball to build steam.
Interesting. And so in terms of where do you think public relations is going today? I know you're a world-renowned, what I would call a trendspotter. You do this annual report. Last year's was interesting. I sort of looked at it. It was the one in December 2019. Now I measured against a time of a pandemic. And for me, there were a couple of sort of overarching themes in them. One of them was in terms of sort of public relations, this idea of people expecting companies to do good, having to manage the age of rage, and then really this idea of authenticity and transparency when you communicate. Do you think those are sort of the trends, given what's happened in the last 7 months, that are still important, or do you think that's changed?
Right, so my overarching trend last year, and you did a really good job of talking about the secondary trends, was the chaos is the new normal.
Right.
So in that organizing principle, I think all those things are true. And just working on our trend report for 2021, and my biggest focus is on zooming in, because I think suddenly, because of the chaos, because of all this rage, we're zooming into the most hyper local. So what's your neighborhood? Who are you dealing with? Who's in your COVID cluster? What are you welcoming in face to face, if at all, socially distanced? And then what are you welcoming in through computer mediation? Who are you bringing in through your Zoom channel, your Teams channel, your cell phone? But the idea of everything becoming very small. Do I have enough food? Do I have a job? Do I agree with what's happening politically? I think we've really made everything very me oriented. It's interesting because a couple of years ago, I'd really been focused on the whole self trend. I mean, selfies obviously being manifestation. And I think right now, it's really about this hyper intensity around local, but it's my world, my safety, my security, my communications, this little map that we've recreated that's very, very small, but very intensely personal and meaningful.
And so do you think then in terms of public relations, that's really, in this space, you have to build around this idea of small and local when you communicate? Is that?
Yeah, I think you do. For me, like small is the new big. It's more important not to have 100,000 followers, but to have 100 super powerful followers who are actually going to participate in the dialogue that you start.
Interesting. There's also been a lot of conversations around authentic communications. I know you touch upon that as well sometimes. What do you think this really means to you? And do you think the pandemic has sort of expedited this conversation around what it means to authentically communicate?
So first of all, authenticity means we now accept imperfections. So if you think about the guy doing the weather, his golden retriever comes onto the set, or the mom leading an executive committee meeting and her kid comes in. I mean, these are all things that are completely okay today because it's part of bringing your whole self to work. And I think a component of authentic PR is don't try to airbrush the imperfections, kind of wear them proudly, be them proudly, do them proudly. And another component of it is learning how to apologize. I think we've gotten much, much better at admitting mistake, admitting a foible. I think transparency is probably the new authenticity. For example, tonight I just saw on CNN that Kamala has canceled her visit to North Carolina because 2 people on her travel crew have tested positive. In the past, you would have kind of put that aside. It sounds like she wasn't even exposed. It sounds like even under CDC guidelines, she still could have traveled. But she's been very transparent, but saying, you know what, I could, but I won't. I'll cancel everything till Sunday. I was tested yesterday. She told us the kind of test she had yesterday. I was tested this morning. I'll be tested tomorrow, and I'll decide this weekend if I'm going to go back on the road. And I think this oversharing is really a huge component of this new normal.
And so do you see that shift then also happening? I mean, we're seeing it in the political sphere. Do you also in your role right now as a global executive, do you see that shift also happening within companies? So this notion of oversharing and, being transparent, and from a communication standpoint, we need to put all that stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, I see this with retailers that are explaining what's going right and what isn't going right. Talking about the fact that they have frontline workers, they're getting sick, but their stores are remaining open. Talking about the fact that they're hiring, but the jobs they're hiring for aren't the highest pay. I see a lot more willingness to own up to one's imperfections and then to be very direct and honest about what's going on.
So I want to talk a little bit about that. So when you say authenticity and transparency, one area where we feel that, and we see actually that, you're starting to see a lot of amalgamation or, coming together is of the relationship between public relations and the social movements or social change that are happening, right? How do you see companies navigating in today's world and what they should be doing to address some of the social movements that are going on?
I mean, look what's happened because the CEO of Richard's agency in Texas has made some very inappropriate and politically incorrect comments. I believe I read this morning that Home Depot's pulled their account from them. I mean, I think that you have got to live the values, both personally and publicly, that you want to be true to yourself, and that you're gonna have to be judged by that. I mean, look at that, the woman they called the Karen in Central Park, horrendous, but her employer immediately terminated her for not being part of the appropriate code of conduct. I think that we're living in a world today where there's public and private. Even the word public relations, it's also private relations. It's all those things that you need to see and do to be consistent with the values that are true to you. Not just the values you choose to convey, but the values that you feel are true to you.
And how do you see companies responding? Like, do you see is the change fast enough, or do you still see there's some room for them to grow on this end?
Look, I think that there's a tipping point of oversharing could be simply too much information. I haven't seen a whole lot of that. I've seen companies like, for example, I saw, again, I think it was on the BBC, a stewardess who was being furloughed doing her last goodbye to her, the people on her flight. It was very personal and she was quite tearful. And that was seen by the public as a very positive thing, and no one condemned the airline for furloughing her. it was just sympathies were with the woman who was moving on until such time as the airline travel picked up again. I think that you're going to see companies having to be very, very honest and direct, and you can't sugarcoat bad news right now.
Yeah. To sort of pivot a bit as well, the nature of work is also shifted. It's shifted even more dramatically the last few months. We've got remote working, we're working from anywhere. There's a lot less physical interaction, especially if you're somebody that works in an office. What do you see as a major challenge from how we communicate, moving forward from an interpersonal perspective? Like for you, like what have been the major changes, and are there some trends moving forward?
So the first thing is, I think that the agrarian clock has dropped dead. So we used to show up for work when the sun rose, and we went home when the sun set, and we saw work as this 5-day interlude in a 7-day week. And now I have a friend who says that Wednesday's the new Sunday, but really what he means is Sunday is the new Wednesday. And I think you're going to see more and more of this, a recognition of my company buys from me 35, 40, 45, 60 hours a week, whatever it is that you've agreed to sell them. But what hours it's going to be, I'm not sure it's going to necessarily be 8 to 6 or 9 to 7 or 8 to 8. I mean, I know in my own experience, I've been on both sides of the Atlantic during this. I primarily have worked on European hours. So I was super happy. I was getting up at 2:30 in the morning. I was working till 1:30 in the afternoon. I'd moved us as a family onto this big lunch. I would take a nap in the afternoon, and then it was really quite wonderful. But I think that from a stress standpoint, our work days have gotten much longer. I know my first Zoom call or Teams call was at 7:30 this morning. My last one will end between 11:30 and midnight tonight. And that's another component of what's now normal. It gets stretched out.
And then also maybe touch upon the interpersonal piece to it, like what a lot's shifted, right? I mean, we don't see people in person. There isn't that sort of social interaction anymore. And so how do you think that will maybe shift in terms of how we communicate with each other, or maybe it won't, maybe it'll go back to normal. I'm not sure.
You know what, in one level though, this has all given us a lot more privacy because there is a separation between home and work. On the other hand, home is in your living room, and your living room is your office. And I remember being on the phone with a member of our board of directors, and she said to me, "Are you sitting on the stove?" And I was like, "Yeah." So I think boundaries are getting rewritten and blurred. Right. I think personal relationships that started face-to-face are doing very well. I know we've had to onboard a number of senior executives during this period of time, and it's very tough. And you really have to designate a personal buddy to someone who's going to really be like that new best friend in school. Otherwise, people are simply lost. I mean, I've never been more grateful for having started at the company 2.5 years ago. So I kind of knew my way around. But look, the other side of it was, in my old life, I was in 2 markets a month, and I've been nowhere but Lausanne or at home in the US since March. And there's something you missed. It's this thing in your fingers that gives you insight. So insights, I think, suffer when you're culling them only from the internet and from your own echo chamber.
Yeah, that's true. There's also been a lot of public conversation around for you trust in communications. So what would you say is the relationship between trust and communications, and do you expect that maybe to change in the future as well?
Well, we used to not trust things that came from PR agencies because we trusted the news. We thought the news was honest reporting. Now we have this whole concept of fake news, and we don't. So I think trust of big corporations has actually risen because in some ways we're under more scrutiny, especially as public companies, to always be telling the truth. Because if we don't, the penalties are so severe. It's a lot easier to lie on the evening news than it is to lie in an SEC document. Mm-hmm. I mean, the consequences are extraordinary. So I think who we trust is changing a lot. I feel like we also, many of us trust science and evidence more than ever before. Others sort of have this, I trust in God, I trust in karma, I trust in whatever meant this to be. So I think there's a real bifurcation of who people are looking to for security and a sense of stability.
And do you think that connection, you had touched upon, this idea of public relations now being about transparency and authenticity. You think that the more that this space or industry continues to communicate that way, I guess that's where the trust comes as well?
The more we are proven innocent in a world where I think you're guilty till proven innocent, the more we're proven innocent, the more credibility we have, the more likely we get to a tipping point and we're innocent until proven guilty. I think that is something that's happening for some dimensions of the public relations space, where we are seen as architects of an honest narrative. Mm-hmm. And if it's an honest narrative, I think everybody's telling a story today. So I think there's a high sense of regard for storytellers. And so I don't think there's the same negative. I mean, I remember back in the 90s, you would hear PR people referred to as flacks. I don't feel like that's still a variable. I feel right now it's a spokesperson. And whether you agree with them or you disagree with them, you still understand they're credibly speaking on behalf of whomever they're speaking on behalf of.
Yeah, and maybe this is a bit of a tangent, but I guess the idea of public relations or communications, maybe in the past people thought, what is that? What kind of a job is that? Like, do you feel now that communications is so important that you need it, that maybe that attitude has shifted in terms of, like, to your point, we're no longer flacks, we're people that work in a field where we are trying to tell stories and communicate a certain way.
Yes, on one level, I feel that there's more respect afforded the profession, but I also see a change coming that I think everybody's going to end up needing to be a communicator. I'm not sure it's going to be a specialty so much as it's going to be integrated into every senior functional area. So I'm beginning to see the shift away from the specialist communicator into the executive who trains just like they train in operations and in strategy. They also train in communication skills. So you might have a core group of people that are communicators, but every senior executive is going to need to learn to be an effective communicator. Right.
So basically moving forward, a key component of being that leader will be you need to be a good communicator.
I'm going to reframe it slightly from what you just said. If you're a bad communicator, it's going to be unlikely you're going to be deemed a good leader, even if you are. Because if you do everything right, but you can't get your story out there, you can't explain it, it doesn't feel authentic, it doesn't feel genuine, it doesn't feel heartfelt, you'll be punished by the markets, by your stakeholders, by your employees. I think internal comms is becoming increasingly important. I know, once upon a time, I probably rolled my eyes and saw it as really tertiary. I saw it as employee communication, something the HR team was supposed to do. And today, I think it's one of the most essential components of what a comms professional has to offer is the ability to turn employees into advocates. And as advocates, they effectively become human media on behalf of the story you want well told.
Yeah, and I think to your
that's interesting. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's very interesting you've said that, because over the years, at least, I work for a financial institution and I've seen employee communications has evolved tremendously. Last 2-3 years, it's been very different, right? Different modes of communicating, oversharing of information. The primarily, I've always thought of it in terms of, with the social changes that employees are demanding a little bit more accountability from our leaders. And, how do you, they want them to stand for something. There's space for CSR. But it's interesting you've mentioned that the other dimension is from a top-down strategy point of view, that you're turning your employees into advocates as well, that they can become that, that connection for you, like that advertisement for you in public space. That's interesting that you've mentioned that. Like, I just thought it was.
To me, it's a super important component of it. Either your employees are with you or they're not. If they're with you, they're more likely to be all in than anybody else. So they become your front line in terms of trying to change community impressions, trying to introduce people to new products or services. So I think employee communications, internal communications, whatever you call it, it is one of the most important disciplines in the PR arsenal today.
Yeah, and I think to your point too, it's one of those ways where employees now also demand, to be involved at a social level. They're very politically engaged, and that also sort of, I think, manages that piece too, right? If you're transparent and you communicate a certain way, you're not going to end up with these, I'll use an example, the Facebook employees that feel that they need to use their social platform to talk about what they don't like about their company, that maybe they weren't able to get that communication internally. And I find that shift very interesting. So
it's something that has to be very, very well managed, but it can't be artificial. You can't sort of just give them cupcakes and tell them to be happy.
Yeah.
You've got to give them information.
Well, you can give cupcakes, but yeah.
Not in the age of COVID. That's the other thing. It's like, it's so much harder. Like, they're more important than ever before. We put more value on relating to them ever before. And yet we can't do the milk and cookies or wine and cheese or bring your kid to work days that we were doing because it was another way to engender employee enthusiasm. So it's really something we've had to get harder and harder putting brain power behind.
Mm-hmm. I also wanted to touch upon, because we are talking sort of about employees and leaders, about communication styles for leaders. The landscape has seemed to sort of dramatically shift, and there's a real interesting, when you look especially at political leaders, like there's the Trump way of communicating, there's, in Canada here, there's the Trudeau way of communicating. Like, what do you see as the best way for leaders to publicly communicate? All right, stop me at any time. Go ahead. Yeah.
No. I was going to say right now, I think, first of all, leaders are judged by the company they keep. So if you think about a political leader, think the residual benefit that Vice President Biden gets from Dr. Biden is really pretty important. I think the role of the first spouse is super important because I think casual power has really risen. I think that we are much more likely to want to know a lot more about people personally, and that becomes a big piece of it. I also think that after COVID, we're never going to go back to formal wear. We are never going to go back to hiding behind our business attire and thinking about the workplace as a showcase for fashion. I think it's going to be much more a place you're going to go to commune with others who are sharing the same mission you're on.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so then, based on that, is there sort of what you would say like a best approach or best way that leaders should be communicating, or that, like, is there some sort of ideal model of communication for them moving forward?
We've been looking at this very, very seriously because obviously I manage a number of executive brands, very different types of executives, different nationalities, 2 genders. And I think, first of all, it has to be authentically yourself. So for me to be bundled into a very, very corporate personality, it simply doesn't work. I'm an old hippie. Yeah. With kind of a preppy overlay. So I am never going to be able to sort of speak like the guys who come from Bain or McKinsey, because my brain doesn't work in that language. I'd say for some of those people that kind of live in the formality, they've had to figure out how to inject emotion into the formality. For me, I've had to be cautious of not being too informal. Because I think COVID's broken down a lot of walls. So I think we've got to be careful that you are your authentic self, but you're not your authentic self turbocharged.
Oh, interesting. I like that. Okay.
Yeah, I just have one question here. So going forward, when we talk about the future of public relations, so we know technology has been a big factor. What are the forces do you see impacting the business of public relations over the next decade or so?
Well, I think the most important one is content creation. I think anybody with a keyboard can create compelling content. I think anybody with an iPhone can create compelling video content. And I think then it's two parts. It's, can you create content? And then can you build an audience? So those are the two challenges, I think, in a going forward way.
Awesome.
And I'm just cognizant of time. Maybe for the last question, what would you see are the three, I guess I'll pick three, main future shifts we'll see in public relations in the coming years?
I think the place is not going to matter. You could be the head of comms at any company in the world, living absolutely anywhere. I think place is not going to matter a whit. I think you're not going to see communicators who typically are just trained in communications. I think you're going to see people come from the psychological field, from the sociological field. I think they're going to come from the engineering field. They're going to have subject matter expertise, and they're going to learn how to communicate. And then I think it's going to be constant reskilling. I think we're all going to be back to school every couple of years to be reskilled because the world's changing so quickly. The only way to get ahead is to get ahead with those skills.
Awesome. And we do sort of do a couple of personal questions for our listeners, just to give you a sense. Did you want to ask the questions, I guess?
Sure. So during this pandemic, or even in general, so we always ask our guests if you can recommend one book, one movie, and one TV show for our listeners or viewers. Anything you're watching.
So the book is really legit because I read and reread Michelle Obama's Becoming, and I found it really, really interesting and inspirational and everything good. My dirty secret of my TV viewing is I watch endless amounts of 90 Day Fiancé. I completely escaped into American reality television. So you said a book, and then movie. I'm not a really big movie person, so I'd say I've watched almost every documentary available on Netflix, but the truth is I love to read books, and I always think I do a better job of casting of these books. And when I watch them on the movies, I'm like, oh no, they put the wrong person in the role. So I couldn't answer the movie one for you, but 90 Day Fiancé is my dirty secret. I mean, when I get home, when I get back to the States, my husband has this like joke of give her 3 days and then she'll emerge from sort of semi-quarantine into the kitchen, and it's only because she's caught up on all 90 Day Fiancé.
I've never, I feel like I have to check this show out now.
Okay, I warn you, it is addictive.
It's addictive. Well, that's what reality TV is. It's addictive. So fair. Okay. So thank you very much for having us, and yeah, have a great day.
Thank you so much, Marian.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed our episode. Your feedback is always appreciated. You can email us at futureof19@gmail.com. You can also visit our website at www.ftrof.com, as well as follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at futureof19. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Future Of. Please leave us your comments about what you liked, what you didn't, and what would you like to focus on future episodes. We'd love to hear from you. And lastly, if you are enjoying our episodes, if you enjoyed Season 1, looking forward to Season 2, please consider supporting us at Patreon at www.patreon.com/futureof19. Thank you very much for your support, and have yourself a wonderful day.